look forward to working with President Trump once again to strengthen North American economic opportunities for the middle class.
As you just heard there, the Prime Minister says he's looking forward to working with President Donald Trump again, but bilateral relations were rocky, to say the least, during Trump's first term. The renegotiation of NAFTA was a roller coaster. Trump imposed punishing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. And let's not forget the interpersonal challenges between the two leaders. Remember this hot mic moment in 2019 and Trump's response?
It was like this takes 40 minutes.
Well, he's two-faced.
With me now are two people well acquainted with the challenges during Trump's first term. Rona Ambrose served as interim leader of the Conservatives from 2015 to 2017. She also served on Canada's NAFTA Council during the renegotiations. And Bill Morneau served as Minister of Finance from 2015 to 2020. Hi to both of you. It's very nice to see you. I appreciate you making the time for the conversation. I wanted to start off with a quick question, if I could, Mr. Morneau, on the outcome of the election. And if it caught you by surprise at all, or if you have an understanding of why, in your view, Trump did win, what you think the issue set was.
Well, I have to be honest, I wouldn't have taken a bet one way or the other because the polls were so hard to read. But fundamentally, I thought that the challenge that the incumbent, effectively Harris, was facing was inflation, and that's a pretty important challenge for any incumbent government these days. So I don't think we should be surprised that people decided that they wanted to look to a new team. And that's the challenge we face in all Western democracies right now.
Ms. Ambrose, was it inflation? Is that the key, do you think?
I think it was inflation. And I think but it must have been more than that, because his win was so overwhelming. I mean, that is what shocked me the most. I mean, people call him a racist, a Nazi, and everything else, and yet he increased his vote amongst women, amongst minorities, in places that, in New York, in places that are heavily Democratic. I mean, it was shocking. I thought he would win because he had the momentum behind him, and Kamala Harris made some serious missteps in how she was communicating what she would do different from Biden, but there's got to be more to it. And I think part of it is this sense that Trump, as the strong man, is going to do whatever it takes to protect the borders, to protect the jobs, and settle things in the world that feel chaotic right now. And it's the way he talks to people. And I think that resonated with a lot of Americans.
It's not, only how he was talking about that stuff, Mr. Morneau. He put some specifics on the table about how he was, for example, going to protect the American economy and American jobs. And chief among that is this across-the-board 10% tariff on imports, all imports. I was told by someone in the Prime Minister's office this week, Canada has received no assurances that we would be exempt from the application of those tariffs. If you were still Finance Minister, how much would that worry you?
Well, obviously, it's worrying everyone a lot around the world, not just in Canada. I expect that what we need to do now is to think about how we can, communicate, as we did last time, the importance of the Canada-U.S. trade relationship. But we're going to need to go further. We're going to need to think about what policy initiatives, what substance can we actually think about that will align with the kinds of things that the new president is going to want to focus on. So we'd be worried, and we should be worried, and we need to be on the top of our game and think about what we can do to improve our outcomes. I'm
going to quickly follow up with you before I go back to Ms. Ambrose and ask, when you think about what those kinds of policies might be, what are they? What are a couple of things that you think the federal government should pursue that would be in line with the type of things that you think would resonate in the White House now?
Well, the world's changed a lot since the last negotiation. The geopolitics have changed dramatically, so with that you need to think about defense. Obviously, technology has risen as a critical determinant of the status of the U.S. versus China, so we need to think about how we align with the U.S. in the technology sector. And obviously, we're going to need to think about some of the economic issues that we're going to face. So energy security is going to be critical. We're going to be forced to think about the dairy sector. So as I go through those one by one, we will need to think about how we get to our defense spending targets more rapidly than the government has currently laid out. We're going to need to think about, whether we focus on energy security in a way that makes us clearly an important part of the U.S. sector that way. And that means we have to ask ourselves, is it really the right time for caps on emissions? Is it that we need to be moving really fast on carbon capture and sequestration at the same time? So that'll be critically important. And we'll need to ask ourselves, and this is some hard questions, should we really move forward on a digital services tax on technology when technology is going to be a critical issue for the U.S. to stay in the ascendancy? And should we be looking carefully at our supply managed sectors to think about what we're going to do when we're inevitably faced with that issue in an upcoming discussion? So these are hard policy choices. I think they're the right things to be putting on the table to think about now. It's not only about having great relationships, it's also about the substance of what we're actually going to do to be a good partner to the United States.
If I interpret that right, Ms. Ambrose, it's like the context has changed. So the government, and I know, as a conservative, you would disagree with some of the stuff the government has pursued. But putting aside, I guess, that view, does the changing context in the States, as Mr. Morneau points out, kind of necessitate a different approach on stuff that has been ideologically valuable to the government?
Absolutely. We are in a completely different situation. I mean, the government has an economic update coming up, I think at the end of November. And I would recommend that if they've written it, they rewrite it and they look at it and make sure that it outlines the domestic economic policies that will make us competitive. I mean, we've got two trains coming at us. We've got the tariff war that's coming at us from Trump. There's only so much we can control there. And as Bill said, there's things that we can put on the table and we've got to hit back hard and retaliate with our own tariffs. But the other is within our control, and that's our domestic economic policies. And we know what Trump's going to do. He's going to lower the business tax rate to 15%. Our combined federal provincial is 38%. There's no carbon tax in the US. We have to think about, how do we lower emissions without a carbon tax? The Americans do it. How could we do it? We've just put a cap on production in our oil and gas sector, and we're the only country in the world to do that, which makes energy more expensive. Trump is saying he's going to deregulate in all kinds of sectors to make energy cheaper as an input for businesses and homes. So we just increased the new capital gains tax inclusion rate, which is a drain on innovators, small businesses, startups. All of these things that we've been pursuing, which is a higher tax agenda, right from the carbon tax to the capital gains tax, is a drain on productivity and it's a drain on investment. So we've got to become more competitive, and we're not doing that here at home. We have a chance to do that, and we're going to continue to be uncompetitive with the US if we don't. So we have a chance to pivot. We need to do that. We've done it in the past when the US has lowered their corporate tax rate. We've done the same thing to make sure that we can continue to attract investment, capital, and businesses to Canada. And we're going to have to react again to maintain or to create some level of competitiveness in our economy.
You've been on the inside of this government, Mr. Morneau. Do you think there will be a willingness to do that? And I ask because you both point out, for example, the cap on emissions that was just introduced last week, the digital sales tax, a host of other things. Like, that is in line with what the government says their values are. Is it a hard pivot for them to make, Mr. Morneau, or do you also view it as one they have to?
Well, Rona and I largely agree on the fact that we really need to consider the fact that the world has changed. So if you're asking, do I think it'll be tough for the government to come to decisions that we need to make in order to have a good chance of having a strong position in our negotiations? Yes, it'll be tough for them to come around to that, but I don't think there's really a choice. We need to think about how we can better align ourselves with their goals. We need to understand the legitimacy of their election and the fact that, Trump has a real mandate, and so he needs to follow through on that mandate. And the only way we can enable ourselves to be successful in that negotiation is by moving in directions that make sense for us and that make sense for us to work together with them. And so clearly there's some things on the table. Defense is critically important in the changed world. We do need to recognize that technology is a really important issue, so we want to make sure we're on the right side of that issue. And even if we have a principle on what we want to do around taxation, it may not be the right time to think about that right now. And of course, we're going to need to think about all of the other things that Rona just went through and decide where we can have the most impact by seeing the places where we can change policy to make those negotiations go better. So substance matters. It's not just about the relationships, it's about what we put on the table.
Just really quickly, a follow-up on the substance. Do you think the government should pause or delay the cap on emissions?
Well, my view is that energy is one of the most important sectors in Canada. Clearly, it's a hugely important issue for the United States, energy security. So we should look at that and say, how can we meet our goals from a climate standpoint? And I would identify, moving faster with the energy industry on carbon capture and sequestration. And at the same time, I would question whether putting caps on emissions right now is the right time. So yes, I would look at that in the context of the broader North American relationship. And I would be very careful about thinking about doing that now.
I just have time for one more question. It goes to Ms. Ambrose, and it's political in nature because this is a political show. You were a part of this kind of cross-partisan effort to advise the government on NAFTA, and the finance minister got a question late in the week, last week, about the prospect of essentially that happening again. And she, singled you out as kind of a success story. I'm just going to play that clip for one moment.
During the first Trump administration, when we renegotiated NAFTA, and that really was a Team Canada effort on my NAFTA council. A prominent conservative, Rona Ambrose, was a member of that council, and she played a really important role. And actually, I think I can say that she's become a friend.
I just wanted to get your reaction to that and ask you kind of bluntly, do you think there will be that same kind of, it's a different political context now, right? Do you think there will be kind of a cross-partisan effort again?
I think that it worked well. I was happy to be a conservative at the table, giving my views and helping in any way I could. But we're just way too close to an election, and my energy is going to be supporting my team and Pierre Poilievre win this next election. It could happen at any moment. So that's where I'll put my energy. But I think those types of committees and councils work really well. So I assume that they'll go ahead with something like that for sure.
Okay, long road ahead. I'll leave it there, both of you. Thank you so much for the analysis and the insights today. Really appreciate it. Former Finance Minister Bill Morneau, former Interim Conservative Leader Rona Ambrose.